Hopefully you enjoyed this week's TC themed challenge. I certainly enjoyed creating it. So let's take a look at our inputs. So if I just expand the profile pane down here, what we were looking to do is first of all combine together each of the days. So we're using a wildcard union and we're using the pattern of a star and then ending in Nov for November. So it doesn't pick up that attendee sheet here because we wouldn't want to be unioning in that yet. So that's the first thing we need to do. And if we take a look at how that data is structured, then we can see that we've got our subject and our session IDs, what times those sessions happen, who's actually attending those by way of an attendee ID, the table names, so those sheet names, and the file path. So what we're going to do first of all, we don't need this file path, we'll just get rid of that. So click on that and go to remove field. And then we'll use the table names and the session time fields to create a date time field. So let's see how we do that. So you can see we've got 12 changes there. Quite a lot's going to happen. So we first will get rid of that file path. And then how I found it easiest was to just look at the table names, split that field up into 10th and Nov. So have the day and the month in separate fields. So that's what I do here. Split those two up. So I remove the letters from here and make that a whole number. So change the data type. And then I look at the time and I do a similar thing. I'm going to split that up as well so that I have the hour and the minute in different fields, changing that empty value to be a 0 just by clicking on that and typing in 0 there. And that is how we get to that, changing them both to be whole numbers as well. And then we can write the big long make date calculation. So let's just zoom in a little to that calculation. So I've got a make date time wrapped around everything. And then within that, a make date. So this is the year, is 2021. The month is going to be using the month function wrapped around the date pass function. So we're using date pass with inverted commas and capital MMM to pick up that Nov of that table name split 2. And then our day is just table name split 1. Okay, so that's made our date. We have a comma between this, then we make our time, and that is our session time split 1 and session time split 2 for the hours and the minutes, and then a 0 for the number of seconds. So that's all quite long and ugly. I definitely didn't do that all in, it sounds like I just straight away went in and did that. I did a lot of playing around with different options of how I might get to that date time. And this is the way that worked for me. Maybe you found a much more efficient way. If so, we'd love to hear about it. Okay, so our next thing, now that we've finally created this date time field, removed all those other extra fields, then we need to look at our attendee IDs, split these all up and pivot them so there's a row per attendee. So splitting up those attendees using the ellipsis menu here to go to split values and automatic split. So it splits on all of those commas. And then we get these 5 split fields and we can remove that original attendee ID field. We pivot this using a wildcard pivot, using the split as the thing that we're going to look for there. And then we're just going to make sure that we change our data type of our attendees to be numeric so that we can actually join these together and create our data set, which has the subject, attendee, date time, and session ID. Nice and simply. Okay, now is where we're going to start thinking about those indirect and direct contacts. So I've added a clean step and gotten rid of every field other than the attendee and the session ID, and I've renamed the attendee to be direct contact. I always find it really useful if I'm going to be joining the data onto itself to rename the field before I do that self-join. So I join the data onto itself. If you've not done that before, I pick up the clean step and just go backwards in the workflow to join it to a previous step. And I join it using the session ID. And then all that I have now is the same as at the end of this join, but now I've got that direct contact added on as well. We need to filter out where we have the same name. So we need to write a filter that says attendee doesn't equal direct contact, because it doesn't make sense to make a contact with yourself. You're not going to learn more talking to yourself. I don't know, maybe you will. Um, but that's something that we want to filter out of this data set. And then we want to start thinking about indirect contact. So if I go through a similar kind of process. So the only fields I'm going to want are the subject. I'm going to need to know the subject this time so that it stays relevant, because we won't have the session ID anymore. So we're not using the session ID to join up, we're using the subject. We're looking at our direct contact. So that is now the fields that was called attendee. Yeah, it was called attendee. Now it's called direct contact. The direct contact field we renamed to be indirect contact. So who is the direct contact of our direct contact? For those attendees, it is the indirect contact. Ooh, that's confusing. And then the date time, I'm just going to name this the DC date time, the direct contacts date time. So what session did our direct contact meet these indirect contacts? So hopefully you're still with us through that. The join here, this is now complicated again. And again, this is something that I didn't design and know exactly how to do initially. I had to do a lot of trial and error of different things. So don't worry if you're finding this a little bit complicated. It's meant to be. So we join our direct contact onto our direct contact. We join our subject onto our subject to make sure that we're only considering contacts who are interested in the same subject matter. And then we need to do a join condition where we're saying the date time has to be after the direct contact date time. So basically, we can't get knowledge from the indirect contacts if the other sessions haven't happened yet. So that's why it's a greater than or equal to join clause there. Okay. And then we're doing a little bit more filtering. So 2 filters here. So we're saying that the date time isn't equal to the DC date time, because we've already classed these connections as direct contacts, so we don't need those extra rows. And then we want to do another filter to say that our attendee isn't equal to indirect contact, so that we don't have that clash going on as well. Okay, so we've managed to find all the direct contacts, all the indirect contacts. We just need to reshape our data now. We've done the hard bit. So we do a pivot, another wildcard pivot where we do use the word contact as the search clause to get that direct and indirect contact into one column. And then we're just going to aggregate, because there'll be lots of different there'll be duplications that have come through. And the important thing here is to remember that we want to be doing the minimum for the contact type. This works because direct contact comes before indirect contact alphabetically, and that's what we want to say. If they have met them directly, we'd rather they be listed as a direct contact, even if that's after they were first introduced as an indirect contact. Okay, and finally our output, just these 4 fields that look nice and simple, but a fairly complicated workflow underlying them. So hopefully you enjoyed this challenge and that it made your prepping skills think a little bit. Thanks for watching.